My name is Zhao Mengtao. I'm from the Chinese Embassy in Thailand. I'm the political counselor. So thank you very much, Professor. So I would like to give you some comments. So with the joint efforts by China and ASEAN countries, right now I think the situation in the South China Sea maintain peace and stability and remain the safest and busiest waters for international navigation and overflight. Not long ago, China and Indonesia signed an intergovernmental document on maritime joint development. China and Malaysia launched a bilateral dialogue on the management of maritime issues, and China has established a maritime dialogue mechanism with all the countries concerned. So right now, the responsibility for the current tension situation at the South China Sea does not lie with the Chinese side. And with China's facilitation, the consultation on the COC are accelerating. China is ready to work with ASEAN countries to set up communications, stay clear of the disturbances, and build consensus for an early conclusion of the COC, so as to truly make the South China Sea a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation. So China stands ready to continue to resolve the relevant disputes peacefully through bilateral negotiation and consultation with the states directly concerned on the basis of respecting historical facts and in accordance with the international law. And China is also ready to make every effort with the states directly concerned to enter into a joint development in relevant maritime areas in order to achieve win-win results and jointly maintain peace and stability in the South China Sea. So also we welcome the ASEAN countries to play a constructive role, because China and ASEAN are the comprehensive strategic partnership. So that is my comments. Thank you.
The Philippines and China entered into a memorandum of understanding during the time of the later years of the presidency of President Duterte to cooperate in developing the oil and gas in the West Philippine Sea. And the understanding was that China will participate in developing the oil and gas in accordance with Philippine law, in accordance with the service contract system of the Philippines. And that was signed. And I thought that we have found the solution to settle finally the South China Sea dispute, because China will participate in the development of the oil and gas in accordance with the law of the country, Philippine law. And after the signing of the MOU, the terms of reference was signed pursuant to the MOU. And there was a third agreement that has to be signed, that the Chinese commercial company will enter into the Philippine commercial company to develop, because the Philippines has granted the right to develop Reed Bank, that's in the EEZ of the Philippines, in accordance with the service contract system of the Philippines, and therefore the agreement was the service contractor of the Philippines will enter into an agreement with the China National Offshore Oil Company. But at the last minute, China said, we want the Philippines to remove that phrase in the service contract system of the Philippines that the oil and gas belong to the Philippines, and that they wanted to remove the phrase, the Philippine law will govern the contract. But that is within our EEZ. And if we remove that, we will be abandoning the arbitral award, and we will be in violation of our own constitution because what was to be developed was within 200 nautical miles from our coastline. So the whole thing fell apart because at the last minute, China insisted that we abandon the arbitral award. That means we will abandon our rights to our exclusive economic zone. So China wants to enter into a development, and if you go to the website of the Chinese Foreign Ministry website in Beijing, it says there, joint development means that China owns the oil and gas, but because out of goodness, out of its the goodness of its heart, it will allow the other country to jointly develop. But that is not international law. I mean, no country will accept that. And that is why we terminated the further discussions on joint development with China, because China demands that we abandon our rights to our own exclusive economic zone. COC is a product of the 2002 Declaration of Conduct, which says that the parties to the Declaration of Conduct, ASEAN and China, will draft and sign eventually a code of conduct. The code of conduct, the purpose is to maintain peace and stability without really determining or resolving the merits of the case. It was just to preserve peace and stability while the dispute is being settled on the merits under UNCLOS. But China at that time said, we will sign the code of conduct at the appropriate time, when that time is ripe. From the very start, China announced that. And up to now, it looks like the time is not ripe from China after more than 2 decades. And the reason why, because China wants to limit the COC to the spot list. Vietnam wants to include the paracels, and Vietnam will never agree to the COC that excludes the paracels. And we want to include Scarborough Shoal in the COC. China doesn't want to include the Scarborough Shoal in the COC. We want the COC to include the arbitral award of July 12, 2016. China doesn't want to include the arbitral award. We want to make the COC legally binding. China doesn't want to make the COC legally binding. So that's why everyone is saying it's really dead in the water. Existing international legal order is found in the 1945 United Nations Charter. There are 2 provisions there which form the bedrock of the international legal order. The first provision says, all disputes between states shall be settled peacefully by negotiation, mediation, or arbitration. And the second provision states, in the settlement of disputes, the use of force or the threat of force is outlawed. And these 2 provisions have maintained the peace and has prevented another world war for the last 80 years. In the preamble of the UN Charter, they have adopted these 2 provisions to prevent the scourge of another world war. And it has successfully maintained and prevented another world war. But today, this existing international legal order is threatened. It's being tested in 2 areas of the world. In Europe, Russia has invaded part of Ukraine to settle a territorial dispute with the use of force. That is why the entire European United Nations and all the peoples in Europe, having experienced 2 world wars, it is in their DNA that territorial disputes cannot be settled by use of force. And that's why they are supporting Ukraine. They do not want to go back to the period before the 1945 UN Charter. Before the 1945 UN Charter, the rule was might is right. If you have a dispute with your neighbor, you invade your neighbor, and if you succeed in invading your neighbor, you are rewarded with the territory of your neighbor. That was the rule, and that has led to wars and finally to two world wars. And since the nations of the world have seen the power of the atomic bomb in destroying two cities in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the framers of the UN Charter decided to outlaw the use of force or the threat of force. But this existing international legal order is now threatened in Europe with the Ukraine war and also in Asia. In Asia, China is claiming almost the entire South China Sea with its 9, now 10 dash line. The dash lines are still growing. And China has amended its Coast Guard law to authorize its Coast Guard vessels to use all force, all kinds of force, including the use of weapons, to enforce its claim under the 10 dash line. And this is in itself a threat of force, which is outlawed in the UN Charter. And beyond the threat of force, China is using gray zone tactics. It is using water cannons. It is ramming Coast Guard vessels of the Philippines and even of Vietnam. So in the South China Sea, the Philippines is carrying the brunt of defending not only its maritime zones, but also the law of the sea, because UNCLOS applies to the South China Sea. There are high seas in the South China Sea. There are exclusive economic zones. And all of this, the high seas and the exclusive economic zones of coastal states, are all encroached by the 10 dash line of China. In the latest map of China, they have called the dashes, the 10 dashes, as its international boundary. What is enclosed by your international boundary is your national territory. So China is claiming all the waters and resources within the expansive 10 dash line as its national territory, including the high seas. The high seas belong to all mankind. All nations of the world can fish in the high seas of the world. Nepal, Laos, all landlocked countries have a right to fish in the high seas of the world. And the natural resources of the high seas beyond national jurisdiction belong to the common heritage of mankind. So Thailand, all the ASEAN states have a stake. Even European states have a stake in the high seas of the South China Sea. And that's why the world has a legitimate interest in the South China Sea dispute, because the high seas of the South China Sea belong to the common heritage of mankind, and China is claiming the entire high seas of the South China Sea. In 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoal, which has been part of Philippine territory since the Spanish times. In 1734, Spain came out with a map of Philippine territory, and it included expressly Scarborough Shoal as part of Philippine territory, and this has been carried over in all Spanish maps of Philippine territory. When the Americans came to be the new colonial ruler in 1898, they adopted the Spanish map of Philippine territory, and that means it included Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. So when China seized Scarborough Shoal in 2012, it was an invasion of Philippine territory, seizure of Philippine territory. But we did not use force to retake Scarborough Shoal. We did not send our Navy to retake Scarborough Shoal. We sent our lawyers to The Hague to invalidate the 10 dash line, because we believe in the rule of law. We believe that all disputes must be settled by peaceful means, by negotiation, mediation, and finally by arbitration. And that's exactly what we did. To follow the existing legal order as ordained in the UN Charter, to settle all disputes by peaceful means. So we are bearing the brunt of defending not only our own maritime zones and territorial islands in the South China Sea, but also in defending the rule of law, defending UNCLOS and the UN Charter in the South China Sea. And I'm not part of the Philippine government anymore, so I'm a private citizen. So all I can do is to recommend to the Philippine government the next step. And I've been recommending that we bring China again to arbitration on the extended continental shelf, not only China, but Vietnam and Malaysia, because beyond our exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea, there are overlapping areas on the extended continental shelf, overlapping among 3 ASEAN states, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And also China is claiming the same area under its 10-dash line, although China is more than 350 nautical miles away. Under UNCLOS, you cannot claim maritime zones more than 350 nautical miles from your coastline. And so my recommendation has always been we bring all other states, China, Vietnam, and Malaysia, to compulsory arbitration under UNCLOS to settle the overlapping claims in the extended continental shelf. That follows the UN Charter that the dispute should be settled by peaceful means, by arbitration, and besides, under the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, if there are opposing overlapping claims in the extended continental shelf, the UN Commission will not will not resolve the issue. It will allow the parties to decide that by negotiation or by arbitration. And at this stage, of course, negotiation is over because we have been discussing this for the longest time. And so my recommendation to our government is to submit this to arbitration. And in the arbitration, only the 3 party states, Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines, have a legitimate interest because it is within their 350 nautical miles from their coastline, and China is so far away, more than 350 nautical miles away. So we expect that this will be resolved in accordance with the UNCLOS. There's a formula under UNCLOS to divide, to demarcate the extended continental shelf, and I suppose I've talked to the Vietnamese and the Malaysians, and we will be happy to resolve this in accordance with UNCLOS. There's a formula. And so that's my recommendation. And there is another dispute in the South China Sea, the territorial dispute. And of course, in the South China Sea, there is no treaty or convention that requires the parties to the territorial dispute to submit it to compulsory arbitration. And that is the problem. This territorial dispute over Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys will remain outstanding. Of course, territorial disputes refer to geologic features above water at high tide, because these are the only features that are considered as territory. And all the islands in the Spratlys are disputed among Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, and China. And following the provision of the UN Charter, this must be settled peacefully. And we are now in the late stage. This should be settled by arbitration. So my recommendation to my government is to settle this by arbitration by inviting China, Malaysia, and Vietnam to submit the territorial dispute in the Spratlys to arbitration, because that is in accordance with the UN Charter. Of course, the problem is the consent of China will have to be secured, and I understand that Vietnam and Malaysia are willing to submit this to voluntary arbitration, but China may not. But we have to first offer China to submit this to arbitration, because that is the rule of international law, to settle all disputes by peaceful means, and arbitration is a peaceful means of settling disputes. Unfortunately, even in ASEAN, among the 3 ASEAN states that have territorial claims in the Spratlys, among Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia, there is no compulsory dispute settlement mechanism within ASEAN to settle a territorial dispute. All the coastal states of ASEAN, there are 10 coastal states of ASEAN, only Laos is not a coastal state, and all 10 coastal states of ASEAN are members, are parties to UNCLOS. So we are bound to settle our maritime disputes by compulsory arbitration. But when it comes to territorial dispute, we are not bound. But territorial disputes is as important or even more important than maritime disputes. So unfortunately, in the UN Charter, it only says member states shall endeavor to resolve peacefully all disputes in a timely manner through dialogue, consultation, and negotiation. There is no mention of arbitration. So it's just to endeavor to resolve. That is a best effort. It's not even mandatory. It's even less than the requirement under the UN Charter. The UN Charter says all disputes shall be settled by peaceful means. But in the ASEAN Charter, it only says shall endeavor. Best effort is not enough. I think the world has moved on. It must be obligatory and with a dispute settlement mechanism that's compulsory. We do not have that in ASEAN. That's why we have a problem between Cambodia and Thailand. I think the present generation of ASEAN citizens deserve better. We, the older members, the older generation of ASEAN citizens, have an unfinished work. We have to revise the ASEAN Charter to make it mandatory that territorial disputes within ASEAN must be settled by peaceful means, including arbitration with a compulsory dispute settlement mechanism, because as a community as an economic union, we can never reach our goal if we have territorial disputes. That's why in EU, before you become a member of EU, you must settle all your territorial disputes with the members of EU. In Latin America, in South America, they have the Pact of Bogota, where all disputes, including territorial and maritime disputes, shall be settled by peaceful means through arbitration as a last resort. We do not have that in ASEAN. So territorial disputes continue to fester in ASEAN, but we have a history of voluntary arbitration. The first voluntary arbitration to settle a terrorist dispute was between the Philippines and Indonesia. At the time, we were under colonial rule, so it was between America and the Netherlands, and we settled peacefully a territorial dispute in Las Palmas. The Philippines lost. We abided by that. And then you have the Cambodia and Thailand border dispute on Preah Vihear that is settled by arbitration under the International Court of Justice. And then Malaysia and Indonesia over Sipadan and Ligitan. Indonesia lost, and Indonesia said, okay, we will move on. We accept the decision. Malaysia and Singapore over Pedra Blanca. Malaysia lost, and Malaysia said, we will move on. So we have a history of settling territorial disputes by voluntary arbitration. Why don't we now include that in the Charter of ASEAN to settle territorial disputes once and for all? Because we owe it to future generations of ASEAN citizens. We cannot bequeath them these territorial disputes. So I end my presentation here. Thank you for your patience and kind attention.
Okay.